Welcome to the Accessible Housing Podcast. My name is David Myers. I'm a Black disabled man living in Toronto, and I work at the Center for Independent Living in Toronto. This is one of a series of episodes on the topic of accessible housing. Our guest is the co-chair of the Accessible Housing Network, Kate Chung. Kate has worked tirelessly advocating for the right to accessible housing in Toronto and across Canada. Kate, let's start off with your personal story. Why do you need accessible housing?
Well, first off, I worked for many years in social services and I saw the huge need for accessible housing. But meanwhile, I'm now retired and in my 80s, and I need to have an accessible apartment. The condo that I live in now is non-accessible, and I can't find a fully accessible condo or rental apartment anywhere in Toronto. And we're all getting older, and we all are subject to illness and accidents. So any one of us could need accessible housing right away. So this is an urgent issue.
Yeah, you're right, Kate. And the seniors population is rising in Canada, and we need to be building for the housing needs of an aging population. Many Ontarians may have the idea that everyone has a right to accessible housing if they need it. We hear a lot about achieving an accessible Ontario by 2025.
Actually, that quote refers to the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which deals mainly with the exterior of public buildings and a few other things, but it does not mention housing at all. And meanwhile, the Ontario Building Code only requires that 15% of new apartments be visitable. That's not accessible enough to live there. There's no law in Ontario requiring that any housing be accessible. Even seniors' housing is not required to be accessible.
And Kate, how many people in Ontario actually need accessible housing?
As of 2018, about a quarter of the people of Ontario declared that they had a disability and so need accessible housing. And that's increased now as so many of us have gotten older. Families are struggling because their children need accessible housing. There are parents carrying their kids up and down stairs because they can't get into something that's more accessible. And meanwhile, there are people with MS, people out on their bike being hit by a truck. You hear about this every day. So there's a huge need.
And members of the general public may wonder if building accessible housing is too expensive to be practical. Can you talk a bit about that cost?
Well, CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing, reports that it costs the same to build a new apartment, whether it's accessible or not. And the cost of building a house new to be accessible is only slightly more expensive than standard housing. It's renovations to existing housing that are so expensive. And that's why people think that accessible housing is costly. It's really not when it's included from the design stage. And then universal design is a term that people should remember. Universal design takes into account the needs of everybody, of every age and ability. So it's, and there is this stereotype that accessible housing is institutional, it's not attractive, but this is actually wrong. Universal design housing is very attractive and spacious looking. So I ask, why is our government not changing the building code to require that all new housing be fully accessible? Why is the Ontario government not adding housing to the AODA? Why is the City of Toronto not requiring that all new housing in the city be fully accessible? They make deals with developers every day, so this could be added to those deals. The Accessible Housing Network is calling for these changes.
It's a good question, eh? Why? More and more people in Ontario are asking. People with a wide range of disabilities, seniors, who can't find housing that's accessible anywhere in their communities. The network's been engaging with all levels of government and the housing development sector to recognize that cost is not a barrier and to commit to building universal design housing. What can viewers do to help make this change happen, Kate?
Oh, we need everyone to contact the mayor, their city councillor, their MPP, their MP, and demand that new housing be required to be fully accessible. And please go to our website, accessiblehousingnetwork.org, and sign the petition to the Ontario government, which calls for a change in the building code and change in the AODA. No tax dollars should ever create accessibility barriers. Affordable, accessible housing is a human right.
Thanks, Kate, for raising awareness on this issue. And thanks everyone for viewing the podcast. And remember, go to the DHM website, sign and share the accessible housing petition. Thank you.